move on to Saddlestone Lanes. There has been obviously a major issue. Obviously, just to give a little bit of the history of it, we had an accident that occurred along one of the Saddlestone Lanes. As somebody severely hurt themselves, and you were very quick to sort of rectify a very old and crumbling lanes, but unfortunately what's replaced, there seems to be ongoing issues with flooding, and obviously the water's going into people's properties.
Yeah.
I know I've had some emails from, again, a couple of messages from some constituents saying I couldn't be here today, but that was really a big concern. It doesn't still seem to be a resolved issue. The gullies are sort of working, but if there's ice, then they become, ice skating rinks, and they're severe hazards. I know the history of it is.
Yeah, the
We've
whole
inherited something.
the whole Farm Hill Saddlestone area is a big drainage problem. The truth is that the system is under capacity. Highway drainage is designed to drain the roads, but within a very short distance that goes into what's called the stormwater drainage system, which the MUA look after. That takes all the drainage from the likes of the gutters in your house and all of that water, so all of that system gets overwhelmed, and this is it's not the only area, but it's one of the areas where the whole system's getting overwhelmed in severe flood events. And I feel we're probably having more of those events than we once did. So short, strong bursts of rain. That can then surcharge back out. So there are places, and I went to one today, where the water then starts to come back up through the manhole, or through manholes or drains. And people will assume that it's blocked or something like that. Actually, it's probably just there's land further up that's higher, and it's got to a point in a pipe where it's just full, and it goes the easiest route, which is back out onto the road. So the roads are becoming open sewers in that way. As we seal the likes of the lanes, which some of them are and have been grass in the past, they had a certain amount of absorbency, and we take some of that water. If we tarmac them over, then they sort of add to the runoff, so that it, in a sense, does add to the problems. I wish there was a quick and easy solution to this one, and there isn't. We are working with the MUA in various locations to look at the whole interaction of the drainage network. They're aware of the problem in this area, and it's just not easy. There's no easy solution because the network is under capacity.
Is there an action plan for this area at some point?
There will be, but it's not top of the priority at the moment. From our perspective, I'll be honest with you, we're fully committed in places like Laxey, and starting to move into other areas of Douglas where we're trying to get those bigger community level flood protections in place. So that is stretching us at the moment. But there is a list, it is prioritised, and it is on the list. And as I say, in this particular case, it probably sits more with the MUA, but I'm not trying to walk away from this, absolutely not. We are working with them to find a solution together. And work has been done, in fairness, by the MUA. It hasn't solved it, but it's improved it.
I think obviously that's not great news for Douglas South. I think that we're not priority, and we're on a list of we don't know how many sort of scenarios. So I think that's something that, again, is it down to finance? Is it down to MUA? Can you try and just help us understand? Because I know Sarah and I are both constituents ourselves in the area, and we walk around those areas a lot, and obviously see a lot of residents that do and use the lanes, Blafton Manor Hill. These are your assets ultimately, and we can't forget that. So we're protecting your assets, obviously working with the MUA to rectify it. So what is the solution? Is the solution a whole upheaval of roadworks and better gullies, better systems, things like that, and that's hundreds of thousands of pounds?
I think even just clearing the lanes, leaves and things that fall off the bushes and the shrubbery that's around that overlooks the lanes as well. And it doesn't always have to be £1 million project. I think it comes down to like the maintenance of lanes as well, rather than actually always looking at the bigger. There are some easy
Fixes.
And I went to have a look at some of the lanes today, and the one that comes from the roundabout all the way down,
Yeah.
very overgrown.
Yeah.
In some ways, from absorbing the water and
Yeah.
slowing down the
Yeah.
water,
That
that's a
was
positive.
That was not tarmac, though, was it?
That one's not tarmac.
that one's
And
an
I was
overlay.
actually thinking, actually, if we tarmacked it,
No,
which would be
yeah.
great as a resource,
It
it
would
would probably
worse.
make the problem worse.
Yeah.
To be clear, the lane that we're talking about is from Vicarage Park, through Blackton through Harcroft, and it comes out at Alderley Close
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
That's the network of lanes that we're talking about. They're the lanes that were have had lots of work
Yeah.
done to them more recently.
Yeah, and if you talk about cutting back on those, I mean, from memory, they're all residential gardens.
Yeah.
all
So
over.
what powers do you have, or what advice can you give to residents, or what can we do to be able to help
Well,
fix that
as the
problem?
Minister said, we're working closely with the local authorities at the moment to actually put in some common standards if we can across the island, because at the moment it's very much down to individual local authorities how they approach this. And there's a little bit of dissatisfaction with that. So we're trying to establish, can we establish what the standard that we are going to apply across the board is? How then are the local authorities going to approach landowners to ask them to do this work? What if they don't do the work? There may be anomalies that have to be brought through. There are legal processes that may have to be taken. So those are exactly the type of things we've been discussing with the local authorities at the moment, to try and get that common approach and to put in place common procedures.
So when you're trying to get that common approach, do you have all the local authorities together, or do you deal with the piecemeal?
The Minister has been out on a roadshow and had 4 meetings over the last few months where we've met all of the local authorities.
So from our perspective, Douglas Borough Council, how have they been reacting?
And in fairness to Douglas Borough Council, they're really proactive, they're really good. I've never had a problem with them, and when things are brought to light, they will usually deal with them in a really good way. What we started to talk about in this meeting is do local authorities have to be on the front foot and start doing inspections and catching these things before somebody reports them and say, okay, you've got to take that back, it's beginning to impinge on the highway. So there are laws there that we can use, there are laws there that the local authorities can use, but we have to have proper processes so that we're fair to people that we're asking to do the work as well.
You said to me there was a cost to the infrastructure that the MUA could do to improve the drainage.
I said, what was the cost to the...
To improving the infrastructure to the MUA, what was that cost? So it was sort of an estimate.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, inside the infrastructure plan, the 2016 infrastructure plan, there is a Western Douglas problem that we identify very clearly, and it is tens of millions of pounds to solve the Western infrastructure, which goes all the way from Governor's Hill all the way around things. So that was taken into account in the area planning process. So ultimately all of the hills around Douglas, channel down into the Hills Meadow, Tremode and so on, and there is a historic infrastructure issue which mitigates constantly expanding Douglas and having more and more houses and more places that are going to produce water and more tarmac, because ultimately it's just a little river valley that goes down through a port. So it's tens of £1 million to deal with it really properly. But just 2 things I would like to say. The first one is that is to give you an example, which we are going to work with the media on understanding a little bit more. But when we had the Union Mills incident, where there was lots of water all at once, a huge amount of water fell in one particular place. The current estimate I've heard is 45 millimetres, nearly 2 inches of water fell in one place. So it comes down to be a capacity issue in one place. And what can we do in that situation? because there are all these places around the island. We can't have all of them up to the standard where they can take 2 inches of water all falling in an hour or so. So we need to help. We need to get the public to understand that if loads of water does fall in one place, it is going to be a bit traumatic for 2 or 3 hours, because we can't go around putting in the capacity in every place like Union Mills, because it won't ever fall again in Union Mills. It'll fall again somewhere else. There will be hot spots where it's more likely to fall in huge volumes. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, Douglas does have a good regime for road sweeping and gully maintenance. It does have the right equipment. It's one of the best. But in an adverse weather event, when there's huge winds, Isle of Man huge that is, and when there's huge rain or when there's huge snow, stuff is going to be falling off of the trees. There's going to be twigs. There's going to be litter blowing all over the place, and it's pretty quick for that to block the gullies. So the public have got to understand that as well. It's not as if you'd have cleaned it a week ago, it wouldn't have happened, because once a storm starts, all the rubbish is going to go in the water into the gully at the same time, because that's what happens to water. It goes into the gully. That's how the road's designed, and then it's quite likely to get blocked. So so these are issues that we need to get the public to understand. Really, it's not just the DoI's rubbish. When Union Mills has that, there might be special events, and it's not just Douglas Borough Council's rubbish. When the gully blocks up, it could just be that masses of trees and leaves have come down all at once, and they've all gone into the same gully. So we've got to work together, and it's pretty difficult. And I hope the public can understand, our the constraints under which we operate. And one of those being nature is pretty vicious sometimes in the Isle of Man.
It's a very valid point. I think I'm just gonna state here and now, I still don't hear a solution for the Saddlestone lanes. I'm not hearing what the solution is, and that concerns me, because we're going to be here in 3 or 4 years' time, and we're still going to be sitting on the same issue. I understand the water flooding events. I can appreciate that, and I think any constituents can appreciate that as well. That there will be hotspots. It depends when the rain is actually hitting. But from a Saddlestone Lane, what is the solution? Is there going to be a solution? Or is this something that's just never going to be addressed?
I think we'll see an improvement to the lanes as we work through with local authorities what these standards are.
Right.
People will be able to see, okay, well that's the standard that I should be able to expect, and if you're not getting it, then people can complain and say, well, you're supposed to be doing this and you're not. That's not clear at the moment. So just by having clear standards, I think will be a big benefit. It's going to make some people uncomfortable, because you're going to be cutting back somebody's hedge that might have took a long time to grow, and you might be telling them to take half of it out, and it's going to look horrible for a few years. So it's not going to be without difficulty. But if that's the standards that we want, then we're going to have to put in place the processes to. So from that general maintenance, I think we will see an improvement. In terms of the large-scale drainage issues around Douglas, there is money there. There's a climate change adaptation fund available, which is 5 to 7 million pounds a year that we help funnel and prioritise and fund all these schemes. But probably rightly so, we've been focusing on where large-scale flooding incidents are risks, and trying to deal with the catchment. A lot of that's been focused up to now around Laxey. The focus is starting to change towards the Douglas River catchment. Some more study work is going on with my colleagues within the department, looking at the surface water flows into those catchments, not just the catchment itself, so that we make sure we don't accidentally shoot ourselves in the foot with some of that work. But we will see some of that work starting very shortly in Tremode, in the industrial estate there. There's work going on, and it will come down through the catchment. At some point we need to look at the quayside, which is at a risk of flooding with a huge economic impact if it does flood.
One of the Douglas South issues, which I think is second in the list, is the NSC and all through there. So the power station and the NSC, that's after Tremode, it's the NSC, I think, as far as I understand.
And I was delighted to see photographs and video of the new bridge. I'll pull those. The water was about this far off the top of the soffit, which was great, because it means the previous bridge would have been overwhelmed. and there would have been major problems because we made the capacity under that bridge, we increased it by nearly 50%. So there's no way the old bridge would have coped, and that old bridge was at risk of being washed away in those type of events. And you saw, I think for yourselves, when you said the amount of services, telecommunications and power and everything that goes through there, that would have been major problem. So that has worked really well. It's increased the capacity of the river through that section, but it's one part of a puzzle. And we are working through that catchment, and you'll see that work starting to come out more and more as we go along.
Okay, and just on the last point, are there any more questions on, sorry, just to ask, any more questions? So on the last point, to basically talk about the safe crossing at School Village Yield, and where we're sort of up to with that. I mean, I know I issued a question on all the schools and how many had. I've not seen the answer yet, but I know it's like this just because there's been problems with the system. But maybe you can give that update.
Would you want to give the update on the answer?
As I alluded to before, that work is not maintenance work. It's improvement work.
Yeah, I know you say it's an improvement work, but there hasn't been any maintenance done in that area or any up of the area or any investment.
Okay.
So although I know what you're saying, it's not maintenance, but there hasn't been any investment in that place.
We had an amount of money set aside for schemes such as this.
Yeah.
They've gone through a process of selection to determine which ones went ahead. There are some, there's one just around the corner, which I think you, Miss Christian, lobbied for, to help children get to Anglican school. So there's 2 crossings. I think that work's going to start on the 6th of February. So that work's going to happen. There's another scheme down, as you know, down in Pulrose, near Manor Park School. We're putting in a crossing there. The reality is, you're talking tens and tens of thousands of pounds every time we do this. They're not cheap. And we have a limited resource and capacity to do it. So we have to say, well, yes to that and no to that.
I recognise that, but there is two schools that are working out of one building at Scarvalgy at the Meadow campus. So we do have an additional amount of traffic which services the area for a longer period of time. So as well as residents who don't have children who live in the area, they are facing this problem of being able to get through.
So it is an idea. So what we've done in the written answer is we have gone through all of the schools around the island, primary and secondary, and we have described the closest crossing, the number of crossings within a certain distance, where there are school patrols. So what else have we put down in the answer? It's quite a few
what type of crossing? Is it near to the school, directly to the school, or is it in the wider vicinity, but really there to facilitate the school?
So it's a very important school, but it's not the only school that is in that situation, and there is actually crossing 2 schools, from memory, within a reasonable distance, isn't there?
No. There isn't a crossing at all.
Not at all.
No.
I seem to remember within 5
I can't remember.
I'm there every day, Tom.
Every day.
Wherever it is, I'll stand there myself with the yellow vest.
It's Wales somewhere.
I think the other part of this is
It's definitely not a crossing at Scarvalgy. I wouldn't be asking about it for as long as I have.
Let's have a look.
who are the people that are crowding around there in their cars at the time that the school is emptying out?
In the mornings.
Oh, in the mornings.
Well, it's people going to work as well. Not everybody has children who go to the school who live in that area. They might have had children when they were younger, but now their children are grown, but they still know.
No, I appreciate that, but it's a relatively quiet road that gets very busy. With a lot of that traffic is people using the school.
Yeah.
Is a crossing, spending maybe £90,000 on a crossing?
That's tripled then, because I think my answer was £30,000 for this degree course. So how's it gone from 30 to 90?
Well, because we've been putting a lot of crossings in lately, and the reality is we always find that, well, the lighting isn't good enough, so we're going to have to put in some lighting columns. We've got to bring in an electricity supply. the standards mean we're going to have to do something over on that corner, we needed to put a drop curb there. There's always more, so
I accept that.
there is a bit more money than perhaps on the surface it tends to be. Notwithstanding, our first question is there a big safety issue? Should we be making this investment on the safety grounds? And we try to prioritise it. I absolutely agree, parents will disagree with that prioritisation. I would if I was in that situation. But we are trying to prioritise it to say, okay, for our money, where will we get the best impact in the community? And that's the process that we're going through.
So from that perspective, if you're looking at all of the schools, which is why I asked that question, and taking it now from away from you operationally, it's a political scenario where we're saying that possibly all schools, from my perspective, should have a safe crossing. They should all have. It shouldn't be a postcode lottery. It should be an absolute opportunity for a child to go safely to that school. So now it's a bigger issue. For me, it now is, because although it started off in our constituency, it's definitely something that perhaps we should be addressing as an island, and looking at the cost of that, and that should be possibly something that we should be taking to Treasury and saying, you know, is this a possibility for us to have additional funding for safe crossings for schools across the island, and what would that cost? But it concerns me that you are saying they're going from 30,000 to 90,000.
It depends very much on the location, and that's why until the engineering work is started, you know, you can't be precise on how much these things are going to cost. It may be that a drainage is right in the wrong place and you have to move the drainage 20 metres and change the road profile.
A lot of work has been done at Mando campus to encourage children to walk to school, which is fantastic. However, there are, due to the nature of there being two schools on one site, people who live outside of the catchment who inevitably bring their car when they come to drop their kids off at school. That on top of normal residents who don't have children, plus people who don't yet walk to school, who use their cars, it does become quite a clogged up environment, because people, rightly, I accept, do park places where they probably shouldn't park. I accept that is as a criticism of people who might be using the drop-off zone when they shouldn't be using the drop-off zone. I recognise that. However, there isn't any other place to go, and it's not directed or managed very well. So that's what happens. People end up using places where they're not really supposed to, because there's nothing else there as a safer or alternative option. And I think this is why
this problem, haven't we?
And I think this is why the safer schools thing, trying to get a safe crossing point, is important, because we're not maybe looking for the most Royal Royce solution here. It's looking for a solution. You know, at the moment there is nothing there to direct people or to notify other drivers that there was maybe children coming across.
So let's build on this then. Very, very sorry that I can't find the answer, but you know, we did have it within 250 metres, I think, and I seem to remember it was, but we'll go back and it is published, it is up there, but just not, the website's not working. But I'll just ask you two questions then from what you said. The first one is, does a crossing have to have a drop curb and all of that? You know, we operate to high standards, and that all adds to the cost. Firstly, secondly, does it have, what sorts of controls does it have to have? You know, we've been quite bold on parts of the promenade just by changing the colour, and we've taken a lot of flack. I believe in it. I think Jeff believes in it. I find it incredibly safe, because you know, I do remember my dad particularly really focusing on me establishing eye contact with every person who could possibly do me harm from very young, and I just find it incredibly safe, and it's very, very helpful to have these crossings marked out without all of the sort of stuff, the flashing lights. I find that very helpful, but we take a lot of flack for doing it. We are trying. You know, we are thinking about extending it. I'm pushing Jeff to think about extending it in some various places. But, you know, the simple fact is there are many, many people on the island who give us a really hard time if we don't have the whole works of flashing lights and zebra crossings and all of that. So we've got to take a view on what we want. When you go to some, you know, this summer I had the privilege of going to Italy a couple of times in tourist resorts, and in Italy every 100 metres you just have black and white lines painted across the roads with no drop curbs, as if it's helpful. So, but you know, you're taking the
I don't understand, and I'm just going to, but I don't understand how the priority of safe crossings for schools is not as important as doing Victoria Road, raising that up just for a load of pedestrians,
I was going to
and
say,
and spending money on that when actually our schools and children are far more important. That's absolutely disrupted, you know, businesses in the area, and I declare an interest. I have a business along that road, but it's the taxi drivers, etc. That was not a necessity. There was absolutely, especially during this time, but how can the priority of that be more important than putting safe crossings at schools? I don't see that. I don't know what politician would. I think even you, in your you know, a good day would be saying, you know, children come first, wouldn't you? And you know, you wouldn't.
But say so now it's, you know, on the table. So basically that crossing is the last little piece in the vision that was laid out 10 years ago for having access from the promenade through
How
to
much
the
did it
quay.
cost?
That well, we're waiting for somebody to ask, probably tonight, not the thing, but much less than people think. So you know, we'll give you an exact figure, but it's much less than people think for the actual crossing way. But it's the final path of a sort of you know, taking charge
More
of
than a
life.
zebra crossing at School Valley Jail?
Yeah, more than a zebra crossing.
We'd also
Right, okay. And more
We'd
than,
also appreciate that
how many schools, zebra
hundreds of
crossings
people,
could you have done
including
in place of
children,
that?
cross at that location
Yeah,
every
crossing
day.
location.
So we're trying to make that crossing safer for all those people as well.
But so in the
And
same
the
way that
point
you
I was
respond
making-
to us, sorry Minister, but in the same way that you respond to us, the reason that you don't feel is because there isn't a necessity, there isn't a danger. Surely the system that was there before, what made you feel that there was just as much a danger? In Victoria Street, people were using it, crossing it, there was no danger. So the same argument that you're using to say this to make that safer, you can't say it for one thing and then not for another.
So you're absolutely right. We judge danger on the number of accidents, which isn't the best measure. We are starting to move into new technology where we'll start to do it slightly different over the next few years. But historically, number of accidents has been a key driver.
Okay.
And that's sensible in many ways in that you're trying to tackle the accident hotspots, and they've been getting tackled over the years, and there now aren't that many hotspots anymore, and you're not careful, you're just chasing random events. So we're moving away into looking at it differently. There aren't people getting knocked down, generally speaking, going into the likes of School Valley Jail. I have to touch wood when I say things like that, because
that's because parents are still dropping their children off or walking their kids to school, whereas I think the option would be they'd be to do it themselves. They've received their training, they've had their proficiency tests all done, they're ready to go, but their parents still have got that worry fear that if they let them go and there is an accident, because it is. I accept it is for a short period of time or 2 hotspots times of the day, but it is. It's like wacky races around there, quite honestly. I mean, just going back, when you talk about historically, Department of Home Affairs provided, I'm assuming it was them, provided with a safe crossing patroller. When we had the move from St Thomas's coming to join us, we had as part of the arrangement, we had somebody who came to help the children to cross the road, and that kind of came and went. I wanted to know what your relationship is with the Department of Home Affairs and bringing that sort of service back as a trial to find out whether it would be something that would be worth that long-term investment of a crossing.
We work closely with the Department of Home Affairs. We have a partnership, road safety partnership, where the objectives of which are to bring down KSIs, killed and serious injuries. So that's an absolute objective. And we are trying to target the resources around that committee into tackling areas that will have the biggest potential impact on those killed and serious injuries. They may not be, and tend not to be, where I get people complaining that they would like a crossing or the likes. So, I don't know, a third of our killed and serious injuries happens on the mountain road. And nobody says to me, we must do something about this. Places where we're not having injuries or people getting hurt, because they're having to take precautions. is where I am getting pressure to put things in place, but it's not going to improve our statistics in terms of people getting hurt. Is the truth of it.
I mean, ultimately, if you had a finite, a budget that would you put them. If it's not a question of money, but I still don't understand. And you're saying that basically the plan was always there to do that, and this is just finalising Victoria Street.
Basically, it even says on regeneration scheme, town centre, it says all that.
But we have every opportunity to say no, we're stopping with that, and we're going to change the resources to do something more important.
But I mean, it is.
You can do that today. You can do that tomorrow.
The Promenade is a much nicer place because of the fact that you've got all of these crossings that people go along very slowly now, which is a good place. I do think it's worked really quite well at the other end of that stretch of Duke Street, Strand Street, Castle Street. It's worked pretty well and linking it in and making it into a nicer environment. So I do think it's a job that needed to do. I do think Scotland Volunteer and the other schools, because there are quite a few other schools that are in a similar position to school, which are important. It's just we have to accept that Meadow Campus is a cul-de-sac effectively.
Yeah.
It's a cul-de-sac.
Which creates traffic going both that way and then back again.
It's got a lot of 20 mile per hour home zones around it. The people. It's not like some of the streets in Douglas Central where people are coming straight out their front door and they've got a couple of 2 or 3 feet before they are into a road. It's got houses with gardens and things. So it is an important priority in that period when we chose which ones to fund in the political minor capital works committee. We went, I think from memory, we went for Solby Strait, something to do with there, because that was a high speed road where people potentially could get KSI. And we went for Johnny Watterson's Lane, which again is higher speed because people are on the way. So we only have 150,000 from memory to give away and to spend in that committee, as far as I remember, and so on. It's a smaller amount of money, and it was just a question of we had all of these projects and we had to choose between them, and we will, as we get more money, we'll get quicker to that sort of scheme, but on a risk-based basis it didn't quite make it as yet, so it's an important scheme.
Did you answer about asking for the traffic patrol to be able to go back to Scotland to do an assessment? Did that get
I meet regularly with the road policing unit, quite happy to talk with them and Home Affairs about
just so you can base it on the data, like base it on something rather than on paper.
I mean, I'm hesitant to say because it is a matter for the police and at the end of the day, but they're under the same pressures that everybody else is under.
I recognise that. But when you look on paper, it's far different when you're actually there. And I am a parent of children that go to that school, so I am representing the views of lots of parents who talk to me in the playground about this. So this is a really important issue, and actually it's not just important to parents, it's important to residents who are worried about the children who run out between the parked cars. They are worried about knocking these kids over because they're walking to school. This isn't just a parents' issue, there's residents as well who live there who are very careful to try, and when they're driving down the road to leave, that they make sure there's no kids that run out between the parked cars. And I've videoed it and I've took pictures and I've submitted all of these through to you, and I still feel like we're not getting any further forward on this. It's being taken seriously.
It's a real shame, it really is.
Whereabouts would this be? Because I'm a bit lost in all this, if I'm honest.
Scarvalagil.
No, but where exactly on that road up to? Because I'm thinking if you're on the main road and you're crossing to go into that bit of the estate anyway, there's no crossing there really.
So no, if you come up Cable Garden Hill, turn left at Meadow.
But is this as you go in past the spa shop and up there?
No. So come up Cable Garden Hill, and then you get to the roundabout, turn left into Meadow Crescent. So Meadow Crescent, then you go over about 5 speed bumps, at the very end it's a school. So that's the only access to the school.
Do you remember during election time?
That one.
Yeah,
I get
the
lost.
station.
Yeah.
I get lost right here. It's not on
Yeah.
anyway.
No, it's there.
So
and it's also on a corner as well, so you sort of have a lot of parents sort of going over the grassy verge to kind of then cross, and if they're a little bit further up, and sometimes the cars can't see, so it's not great.
And the only reason it didn't quite make the cut with Johnny Watterson Lane and so on is the average speed is about, from memory, 8, 9, 10 miles per hour because it's a cul-de-sac and people are all going to a school. So
drivers are recognising it's a risk.
Yeah.
But we're not
Children
only
learn,
online,
they're
they really are
moderating their
accelerating.
behaviour.
Yeah, correct. They are moderating their behaviour, but they are also becoming increasingly frustrated at the fact that there doesn't seem to be anything happening. So it kind of gets to a point where everyone is just angry. And so you go back to your well-being point before, you know, it's a stressful time anyway, getting yourself ready for work or to school and different things that you have to get up to in the mornings, let alone then having to try and negotiate an area that hasn't had the investment that it should have had.
And this also comes back to, and not just, because you again, I mentioned before that it was about a legacy problem, but actually going forward, if there are any school plans, new school being built, we absolutely need to have
You wouldn't,
these.
I don't think you'd get away with it now.
You just wouldn't.
It
But it's got to be
factored in.
implemented as policy.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on that issue?
But also, from the South Douglas constituency point of view, one of the worst places is around St Ninian's, St Ninian's area.
That's not South Douglas.
Well, no, but that's where people from here go to, you know, and sort of they go walking and cycling and so on, and then Ballacommene's not the best, so we still have issues around the whole of Douglas that we need to
But our
address.
catchment's Ballacomene.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mostly. But anyway, okay. Any other questions that you'd like to ask the DoI?
Regarding Stevens Way, is the far end Vicarage Road and traffic coming from the left coming down the road quite often don't stop when you're on the roundabout. They just fly straight through. It's all they don't see that junction.
Well, they don't see Grand Church, aren't they?
Which junction is this? I didn't quite.
Just the end of Stevens Way, where it joins Vicarage Road.
Yes.
Traffic coming down, so I think it would be Q way.
The roundabout.
Quite often
right.
don't
The one
see
that's
junction.
linked to Braddon, it's shared with Braddon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Half of it's up Douglas South, the other half's Braddon.
There has quite often near enough been accidents on there. I have seen that myself. I've actually been a come copy myself going around there. Because they don't think to look right. Because it's not until you're virtually in the roundabout that it becomes apparent with the junction on the right. All the way signage, people don't see the sign. It's just a high bank.
So what solutions are there, Jeff, for sort of traffic speed control and things like that can be looked at for that area?
Yeah, this can be a difficult area because our traffic engineers will tend to look at the psychology of the driver and the pedestrian. So perversely, people think, oh, you need to make better visibility and widen things out. But sometimes that has the reverse effect because the driver thinks, oh, I can see a long way now, I can go a bit faster around here. Whereas if there's slightly more clutter, bushes, etc., then they recognise those risks and they slow down accordingly. So there's not a one-size-fits-all, but the traffic engineers are very much trying to think about, okay, what is going to affect driver behaviour here in the positive. Sometimes it will be good visibility that's important, other times it will be actually if you just widen it out, you're just going to encourage people to speed. It may be tightening the radius so that you actually make the pavement a bit further out into the junction so that it's harder to swing the car around, so they have to slow down. So there can be all sorts of site-specific changes.
So could this be something you could take away from today to have that reviewed?
I'll certainly have a look at it. I've not heard that before particularly, so I'll certainly have a
Maybe
look
to
at
have
it.
an assessment done. Would you give me your email address after this, and then we can certainly come back to you with a follow-up. Thank you. You got any questions? No? Anything else? Anything?
I don't think so.
Lovely. Okay, so thank you. That wraps up. Thank you for everybody that attended, and thank you to Jeff and Mongoose.